Hello and welcome back. This week for episode 7, I'm joined by Alice Tribe from BirdLife, who is going to be talking with us about the fight against the hunting of migratory birds as they pass through the small Mediterranean island nation of Malta. We discuss cultural challenges which are making passing legislation so difficult, some dangerous encounters with shotgun-wielding hunters, what makes Malta so important for wider ecosystems, and much more. If you like this episode and would like to follow Alice's work, please follow the links in the description. And if you would like to support us, you can make a donation at restoreourplanet.org or follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Enjoy the conversation. Hello, welcome back to Restore Our Planet podcast with me, your host, Jack Hole. I'm here with Alice. Alice, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. So Alice is joining us from Malta and she works with BirdLife. So Alice, would you mind starting just by telling us a little bit about your background and how it is you came to do what it is you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it all started back at university when I did my degree in zoology. And I remember my favorite module at that time was animal law. So after learning more about wildlife legislation, I was quite sure that I wanted to have a career focused on wildlife crime. And straight after university, there was an internship that came up for BirdLife Malta, and I joined the conservation team for a year back in 2010. So I had 1 year of experience already with BirdLife Malta. And then I actually had 3.5 years as well in the RSPB investigations team. So I've worked on raptor persecution issues in the UK. And then the job for conservation officer came up at BirdLife Malta in 2017. And I decided I'd like to go back because after just 1 year, I didn't feel like I achieved as much as I wanted to. And there are many issues to tackle in Malta. So when the job came up, I decided to go for it and I was successful. So 4 years later, I'm still there, still lots to do. And yeah, that's basically a nutshell of how I got to be in Malta.
Yeah, brilliant. No, it's a nice little introduction. So Alice, tell us a little bit about the migratory bird situation in Malta and why Malta is so important, because often it's sort of obviously quite small, so it's often sort of overlooked when we think about these kind of things. So what's the background of the migratory birds situation over there?
So as you pointed out, Malta is a very small island, but it's very important in terms of bird migration. So it's actually a very important migratory stopover for many species, as it lies on the central and the eastern Mediterranean flyways. So you have birds going from their northern breeding grounds in Europe, going to the southern wintering grounds in Africa. So many species use Malta as a place to stop and they rest and refuel before they continue on with their journey. It's one of those places where you see many birds at certain times of the year, but then the rest of the time, basically it's just the resident species. So from a birding point of view, it's also quite an interesting place to be.
Absolutely brilliant. And why has it become such an issue in terms of hunting, and what's the background there?
So Malta has a very long-standing tradition of hunting, unfortunately. It actually has the highest number of hunters per square kilometre in Europe. So off the top of my head, I think it's 36 hunters per square kilometre. It basically equates to 12,000 hunters, which yes. It's a lot for such a small island. So basically this long-standing tradition means that most people you come across here, either they're a hunter or they have a hunter in their family. It's that ingrained.
Brilliant. And just to unpack it a little bit more, what's, for example, how many birds are we talking about here being hunted?
So Malta is the only country in the EU that still allows the spring hunting season. And in the spring, only the common quail is allowed to be hunted. But in the autumn, which is we're part of the autumn hunting season right now, it's open for 5 months of the year, and they're allowed to shoot 40 species legally. So as you can imagine, this last week it's been very busy here, because now is the time we have strong migrations for song thrush, starling, skylark, and these are all legal to shoot, unfortunately. So, coming from the UK, which is where I'm from originally, these are all species that are massively in decline. They're red status for conservation concern. So even though it's legal, I still don't enjoy the fact that these birds are being shot, and in very high numbers as well in the autumn.
Okay, so and how is the hunting practices? I mean, is it increasing? What's the general trend there? Are more people doing it? Less? What are the main sort of trends there?
It's a good question. The numbers of hunters themselves seems to be quite stable from year to year, but we do also have an issue with bird trapping as well. So the bird trapping season has just opened, and we have 4,000 registered trappers. It seems to be slightly declining, and I think it's because purely the fact that to be a bird trapper, you have to wake up quite early, and you have to spend lots of hours, prolonged hours, sitting in basically. So this doesn't really appeal so much to the younger generation as opposed to the generation. So it does seem to be kind of naturally dying out. But hunting still appeals to all ages. So that's why the numbers of hunters seem to be quite stable, whereas trapping seems to be declining.
And Alice, could you go into a little bit about, the actual hunting practice, like some of the details in terms of what these hunters actually do, and the trappers as well? What is it there? What is their general kind of pattern? Like, do they get up really early and just blast as many as they can, or what do they do? Do they hide in the bush with us, making duck noises? How does it work?
So it varies between the spring and the autumn. So just to give you an idea, the last week I've been out in the field, and I saw many hunters still out as late as midday. They are allowed to shoot up until 2 hours after sunset. So technically they can be out
Wow.
so it's 2 hours before sunrise and 2 hours after sunset. So even in the dark, you can have hunters out. And I had hunters using electronic callers to lure in birds illegally, because you cannot use electronic callers for hunting purposes. But I had them playing song thrush callers. I did notice a high density just in the last week because of the migration of song thrush. So, and do you want me to explain a bit about the trapping?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so for the trapping, it's different to maybe other people may imagine. So, for example, we don't have an issue with lime sticks in Malta, but it's more a case of trappers sitting in stone hides, and what happens is they have a pair of clap nets, and these are nets that are made on the ground, and they're hand operated. So usually what you will see is you'll have cages with live birds dotted around the site, and then they may have live birds as well in the middle. And sometimes you may even see a live bird that's tethered by a string, which they force to fly, basically. So you see the bird flapping in the air.
Ooh.
This will lure in, it's species of the same species basically flying over. They will get forced to believe that it's a safe area for them to land. So then they'll come down, and the trapper will pull the string, and the nets will get fired over them.
Right. And yeah, no, absolutely. Just for those listening who might not know what a lime stick is, which you just mentioned, it's essentially a stick, obviously, sort of put in. Well, I don't know. Is it? Oh, you probably know better than I do. Put it that way. Would you mind going into it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So it's more an issue in countries like Cyprus and Spain, but I've also done a bit of work in Cyprus, and I saw the lime stick. So they use basically it's from plums, a kind of plum, and they make it sticky. So they put it on sticks, and they will put these in trees and bushes. So when birds land on the sticks, they get stuck basically, and the more they struggle, the more stuck they get. So I've come across birds where their legs and their feathers get stuck, and there's nothing they can do. So the good thing about the sticks in Cyprus, at least, is they are the glue is water soluble, so you can really remove the birds fairly easily. But in other places like Spain, they use an oil-based glue, so it's not water soluble. Not obviously, as one is not better than the other, but that's
of course. Okay, so it's a bit of a nightmare, basically, is what you're telling us.
yes.
So how? So okay, so when talking about yourself and bird life, what specifically is some of the work that you've been doing? What is your sort of day to day? I noticed the other day when we did organize this podcast, we had to postpone it because I think you said you'd come across 200 confiscated finches and you had to deal with that situation. So tell us a little bit about your day to day and the challenges there.
Yes, I think that's one reason why I still enjoy this job, actually, because no day is the same. And as much as I want to try and plan my week, I can never do it, basically, because as you know from trying to arrange this podcast with me. So yes, the finch. Sorry, so the trapping season opened on the 20th, and the Maltese government were able to push through a derogation for finch. I'll call it catching. It's apparently different because basically they've put it under a guise of scientific research, whereby the trappers will catch the finches and check to see if any have been ringed from other countries, including within Malta itself. And then they're gathering information on these birds to see their migratory routes. But I say under the guise because we have evidence to suggest that they are not actually releasing all of the birds they're catching. And the fact that already in October we've had to deal with 350 confiscated finches, it suggests otherwise.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been quite busy this last week, basically.
Of course. and tell me, how is it? Because I remember speaking to someone in a similar role as yourself in Cyprus, and at least I think so. And they were telling me about what it's like, sort of confronting some of these hunters. Obviously, us green eco, quite sort of like to think peace-loving people, sort of running at these sort of guys with big guns and things. Do you get a lot of should we say confrontations in your work?
I would say it's got slightly better compared to how I remember it in 2010 when I was here for that year. I more incidents back then of, so I remember bird ringers, they'd have their session bird ringing to come back and find out their cars had been burnt out and things like that. So really quite extreme.
Yeah. Whereas,
11 years later, I would say maybe it's not that bad. We still cross verbal abuse, a lot of online abuse, of course, and occasionally you get the odd one where, so for example, our colleagues at Cabs, they had an incident where one of their cars was actually shot at like a year ago, and they had the backlights damaged. But I would say it's got slightly better compared to the past. But and I think this is because of the referendum that they had back in 2015. I don't know if you know about the referendum.
A little bit. Would you mind just illustrating it a little bit? What happened there?
Sure. Yeah, so there was a nationwide referendum on spring hunting. So the public were given the choice whether to keep spring hunting or whether to abolish it forever. As I say, Malta is the only country in the EU that still has spring hunting. So it's always been a controversial hunting season. And unfortunately, the Maltese voted to keep spring hunting, but only by 2,000 votes. So I think it was a wake-up call to the hunting lobby. For the first time, they really realised that actually their hobby is not that popular in Malta. as popular as maybe they thought it was. So in 2015, 2016, 2017, we saw a real decline in the numbers of injured protected species that were retrieved by BirdLife Malta as well. So it was almost like the hunting lobby were trying to behave, basically, and put themselves in a good light. So I think that's maybe why the aggression side has toned down a bit. But I wouldn't say that it's gone completely.
Okay. Often with these practices, you mentioned that they've been hunting these birds in Malta for a very long time. I've noticed that with a lot of other practices that, should we say, have a bit notorious, shall we say, things like bullfighting and things of that ilk, you tend to find the pushback is, this is traditional, this is our culture, we've been doing this forever. And they tend to, a lot of the pro people, that seems to be one of the I would say, well, not few arguments, obviously I'm generalizing, but is it similar in Malta that when these people, is the conversation, is it one way, stop killing these birds, they're important, it's a little bit inhumane, let's stop doing this, versus we've been doing this for forever? Is that kind of how the conversation goes on traditional versus sort of new lines?
I would say so, yes. There's still many people here who focus too much on the tradition side or the cultural side. They would see it as an attack on tradition if it was to be abolished completely. And coming in as a foreigner as well, it doesn't help, because I'm that outsider coming in, telling them they can't do something, and that never really goes down too well. But we do struggle quite a bit in Malta, because there's still many people, local people, who they're too worried of repercussions, basically. As I say, it's ingrained. So either they know a hunter, or they have a hunter in their family, or someone close to them anyway might be in that connected to hunting. So there is a reluctance as well. I've noticed from the locals to really speak up or get involved with our work. So, sorry, what was your original question?
No, it's okay. You are actually answering. Okay. Great. No, I was basically saying, in essence, what are the pro hunting arguments? Why are these people so difficult to dislodge from their traditions, as it were?
Yes. So it is a. Yes, when the referendum happened, a lot of people actually voted to keep spring hunting, and their reason was because they thought it was a tradition that was worth keeping. But the same people a few years later are now saying, actually, if they had the chance to vote again, they would vote differently, because now they've woken up and they've realised the damage that the hunters actually do, not just to local environments, but also to Malta on an international scale.
And each other's cars, by the sound of it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. That leads me on nicely. I'd like to ask you a little bit about the ecosystem impact. If you'd like to unpack that a little bit.
Sure. It's really difficult to go for a walk anywhere in the countryside here without seeing signs of hunting or trapping. And it's a real shame, I think. So basically, we had a look at all of the trapping sites across Malta and Gozo, and put together, it basically equates to the same size as Valletta, which is the capital city of Malta. So you imagine a very small island, that much land is being used just for trapping. And they are destroying the habitat, basically, because most of the trapping sites are built on garrigue, which is a very important habitat here. Do you know what garrigue is?
What, sorry?
Garrigue, that's the name of
garrigue. I don't, but please, I think I'm about to find out.
Okay. So I'm just trying to think of what I can compare it to in the UK. It maybe something similar to heathland, where there's no trees as such, but it's very short habitats with lots of flowers. And so here, one of the main plants would be thyme. So it's quite rocky and short vegetation. I'm not really sure how to describe it, but it's
Mediterranean heathland, something like
yes,
that. Should we go with? Okay.
Let's call it that. Yeah. So it's a very important habitat.
Okay.
And it's being destroyed basically for trapping sites.
Right.
And
Okay.
a lot of the trapping sites also appear on Natura 2000 zones, which are protected areas. So yes, it's having a big impact. And also one other thing to mention is the hunters plant eucalyptus trees. And this is a non-native tree species. And as you'll know, it is native to Australia. So it's definitely not supposed to be in Malta. But they favour it because it's fast growing and it provides cover all year round. And the whole purpose of those trees being there is to give shelter or give cover to birds. And then they flush them out and they shoot them.
Oh, blimey. Okay. All right. So zooming out a little bit, what is it? So we obviously we're talking about, migratory birds here. What's the kind of the wider eco impacts of, across, North Africa, across Europe? How is this affecting, food chains and the other influences that these birds would have on the wider ecosystems?
Yeah, well, actually, that's just to mention briefly. This is one point that the hunters quite often bring up, actually, the fact that Malta is such a small island that the damage that they're doing to populations on a kind of a widespread scale is minimal, because Malta is so small, and they will always say stuff like, oh, the numbers of turtle doves being shot in Malta is nothing compared to how many are shot in France and Spain, which is true, but you can't look at it like that. When you have birds that are declining everywhere, every bird matters basically. So we've had some ringing recoveries here of, for example, we had an osprey that was shot and it had a German ring on its leg, and this bird was actually part of a conservation project in Germany. So you can imagine the other countries are investing a lot of money, maybe even millions of money, into conserving the species just to have them fly over Malta and get shots. So yeah, it does have an impact. Maybe I should explain actually a bit about what fuels the illegal hunting here.
Please.
So taxidermy is one of the main drivers here. So like an osprey.
Sorry, I didn't expect that. Okay. Please, go on.
So a lot of the hunters here, they will have their personal collection of birds in their house. So if you're a hunter and your main goal is to basically collect birds, they will therefore want every single plumage type of honey buzzard. And I pick honey buzzard because they're so variable. So you can get them almost white to really dark brown. So they will want every kind of plumage. So this kind of drive is what is the main issue behind illegal hunting. So whenever we have species, like quite charismatic, rare species like ospreys, we don't get many every year, or eagles or storks, flamingos, anything like this, anything either big, rare, colourful. So even birds as small as rollers, for example, because they're very colourful. They're all targets, and it's basically all for taxidermy reasons. So
did not expect that. Okay. That's really interesting. Okay, so Alice, where's Malta going to be on this issue, do you think, in, for example, in a decade? Are things moving? I mean, you mentioned the vote, referendum, I should say, a few years ago, and although the last things seem to be moving in a positive direction. Is that true? Is that the case for the next decade or so?
Very difficult to say, really.
Of course, sorry.
I would say that for some of the more common species like honey buzzard and marsh harrier, we are seeing fewer of them shots compared to the past, where pretty much every single one would get shot down. We're no longer in that kind of situation, but there is still an issue with, as I say, the rarer species. So just to give you a small example, my parents came to see me about 2 weeks ago, and I had a call that there was a short-toed eagle. So we happened to be in the area, so I managed to find the bird, and I showed my mum the bird, and it was the first time she'd ever seen a short-toed eagle. And minutes after we saw it, we actually saw the bird shot at 3 times. Luckily, the bird managed to get away, but this is unfortunately the reality of bird watching in Malta, especially if you see a rare species. So I don't know really how things will be in 10 years. I think it has to come from education and the younger generations if we're going to see positive change. Luckily at BirdLife Malta, we do have a really good education team, and they basically try to cover all of the primary schools, and they're trying to also increase it to teenagers and young adults. So I think the best hope really is, unless the EU clamps down maybe on the spring hunting issue and the trapping issue, then we need the change to come from younger generations, and hope that they grow up to treat the environment better, and to realise that these birds are in decline and they're not going to be here forever if we continue like this.
Of course. Okay. Well, Alice, you just mentioned, actually, I just popped into my head, you mentioned education there. Would you like to share a little bit about, well, it's your turn to plug programs or anything you'd like our listeners to know about, sort of programs you have. You mentioned you had a volunteer program, I think.
Yes, so one of my jobs at BirdLife is to organise 2 bird monitoring camps every spring and autumn. So we cover the main bird migration. The camps are called Spring Watch and Raptor Camp. So every year, basically, I'm looking for volunteers to come and join us and spend time in the countryside and monitor bird migration, but also the illegal hunting as well. So if anyone listening wants to get involved, please send me an email. We'll put my email address somewhere.
Yeah, no problem. I'll make sure that's all shared. And our listeners and viewers will have that.
Otherwise, yeah, they can just visit our website, which is birdlifemalta.org, and yes, become a member.
There we go. I'm sure you can probably donate there as well. I imagine.
Yes, you can.
There we go. Okay, Alice, thank you.
Oh, thank you as well.